Welcome to Value Gene Insight Conversations.
In today's deep dive, our mission is to examine a very specific, critical dynamic we consistently observe across the food industry.
Right. When you look at your manufacturing floor, you are essentially looking at incredible hidden capability.
There is massive headroom there. Headroom for capacity gains, for waste reduction, and highly stable performance.
Yet, despite significant capital investments, many organizations struggle to turn that headroom into sustained progress. We want to unpack exactly why that happens today.
That is precisely the challenge we are tackling. Because when we analyze these operations, we frequently find that the constraint preventing this progress is rarely the equipment.
Or the physical layout.
Exactly. It is rarely the technology itself. The true root cause lies in governance.
And when we say governance, we are referring to the steering layer of your operations.
Yes, it is the operating design that routes problems, forces loss prevention, and makes complex cross-functional trade-offs decidable.
Governance is that underlying mechanism determining whether your plant's capability compounds over time or if it just, well, dissipates into daily friction.
And today we will unpack 4 specific misconceptions about this governance layer. Misconceptions that keep food manufacturing operations trapped in recurring cycles of loss.
More importantly, we are going to detail how to redesign these systems for stable output and predictable quality. So let's start by looking at how leadership teams typically react when performance slips.
There is a very common misconception here. The idea that because an organization runs regular meetings, control is automatically in place.
But adding more meetings just creates a heavier administrative burden. What does this illusion of control actually look like on the ground?
We see this illusion constantly. It is an easy trap for any leadership team to fall into. The pattern is highly predictable, performance drops, perhaps a critical service level is missed.
And the immediate organizational reflex is to add structure.
Exactly. A missed target triggers an extra check-in. That check-in evolves into a longer daily meeting, which then spawns a completely new executive forum.
For a brief period, this added coordination seems to help. Everyone is paying attention, so metrics stabilize temporarily.
But eventually, the agendas sprawl. The exact same topics return week after week with new dates attached. The system begins to collapse under its own weight.
The meetings begin consuming the exact time that leadership desperately needs to actually solve the issues being surfaced.
A perfectly full calendar, where every item is treated as urgent and recurring issues are simply accepted as background noise, is the unmistakable fingerprint of governance failure.
Consider a typical 6:30 a.m. production meeting. We have observed this in numerous facilities. It is a daily ritual, but it operates with severe systemic flaws.
When we sit in the room during these morning forums, the flaws become observable immediately. Picture the dynamic. Planning opens the discussion by highlighting a schedule gap. Yesterday finished short, and an outbound load is at risk unless the first line runs perfectly today.
Operations immediately follows up by flagging a staffing shortage. Perhaps 2 absences on the packaging line and a trainee placed on the filler.
Quality then brings up an open deviation from the night shift. Specifically, a temperature excursion that requires containment.
Finally, maintenance mentions that the capper machine has been a recurring irritation all week, but notes they will just keep an eye on it.
And if you observe the outcome of that meeting, it feels incredibly productive. The room moves swiftly into action. Work is reassigned to cover the packaging absences.
The production schedule is successfully defended to protect that outbound load. But notice what happens to the capper machine issue.
It is labeled a watch it item. Maintenance makes a quick adjustment, and the plant moves forward. The shift is stabilized, and the day is defended. The team leaves, feeling like they have managed the crisis.
That psychological comfort, that stabilization, is exactly why organizations believe their governance is working.
But our analysis points to a fundamental failure here. That meeting completely failed to prevent the capper from stopping tomorrow.
The plant has successfully coordinated around a repeat loss rather than preventing it. The issue was acknowledged, but nothing forced a prevention decision.
No ownership was assigned for eliminating the root cause. No closure point was established where the organization must return with a definitive answer.
So if adding more meetings just creates this cycle, how do we actually fix the governance loop? What does a functional system look like on a Tuesday morning when the capper goes down?
A functional governance system requires a strict control loop. First, it needs a forum that actually has the authority to decide, rather than just discuss.
Second, it needs an explicit owner who will execute that decision.
Third, it needs a mechanism to close the loop, ensuring the action was effective. And fourth, it needs input strong enough to support organizational learning.
Governance cannot just be a daily reset where we survive the shift. It must serve as the organizational memory.
We often talk about behavior installation to make this happen. One practical mechanism we have seen work incredibly well is the use of a temporary shadow chair.
It sounds a bit dramatic, but it serves a very practical purpose. How does that actually work in the room?
The shadow chair is a role dedicated solely to enforcing meeting discipline. They do not contribute to the content of the meeting at all.
Their job is to interrupt the flow when the discussion veers into improvisation.
Yes. They ensure the meeting ladder is explicit. If the capper machine comes up, the shadow chair literally asks the room, who is owning the root cause analysis for this, and on what exact date are we reviewing the solution?
They ensure that disciplined handoffs occur when the necessary authority is not in the room. This prevents the natural reversion to merely managing daily emergencies.
That idea of coordinating around a failure rather than fixing it leads perfectly into how teams handle problems on the manufacturing floor.
Which brings up the second misconception, the idea that escalation is a sign of failure. In food manufacturing, operators solving problems locally is a healthy instinct. But our experience shows this becomes destructive when containment silently turns into improvisation.
That is the exact threshold where the damage occurs. When uncertainty stops shrinking and the plant just keeps running, this so-called ownership means the organization is paying for its learning at full scale.
Escalation should never be viewed as a failure or a lack of capability.
Rather, it is a mode switch. It is a deliberate mechanism to shorten the time to truth by routing a stubborn problem to the specific capability that can actually solve it.
Consider a muffin producer we evaluated recently. It is a perfect example of this operational trap and the massive financial impact it can have.
This facility was experiencing a subtle issue where muffins left the oven looking completely normal, meeting all visual specifications.
Yeah.
But they collapsed internally during the cooling phase.
The operational trap was that the floor team stayed in full production mode instead of switching to diagnostic mode.
The day shift assumed it was an oven temperature or cooling speed issue.
Yeah.
So they tweaked the parameters. They handed these unverified theories off to the night shift, who inherited the problem and continued making micro adjustments.
Adjusting within the standard operating limits. All the while, the product continued to collapse.
Think about the margin impact here. They were paying for their learning in full scrapped batches. They were effectively destroying their capacity and putting their customer service levels at severe risk.
It was only after a massive amount of sunk loss that they finally escalated the issue. They initiated a mode switch to smaller, controlled tests.
Eventually pulling in research and development and ultimately the equipment supplier. The root cause was entirely outside the operator's control.
The site water pH had drifted just low enough to destabilize the product formulation's chemistry.
No line operator could have seen or fixed that by adjusting an oven dial. So why did they not escalate earlier?
When we analyze late escalation, we find it is rarely a single poor decision. It is driven by vague use judgment policies on the floor.
More critically, it is driven by organizational penalties. Escalation often brings hassle, executive scrutiny, or an invitation to publicly explain what was missed under intense time pressure.
The most corrosive penalty we see is learned futility. This happens when teams have escalated in the past, but engineering support arrived late, or management decisions stalled.
Over time, early and late escalation feel identical to the operator, so they delay until the problem is undeniable.
The solution here is to actively build a detection and response muscle within the facility. You must remove the penalties for escalation.
This means establishing crystal clear triggers. For example, if we scrap 3 consecutive batches, the line stops and the plant manager is notified.
You have to actually rehearse that mode switch. Teams need to know how to catch weak signals and pause production before the plant pays for the answer in scrapped product.
Escalation must be made safe, decisive, and entirely free of blame.
That boundary between shifts is where so many of these weak signals are lost. This naturally leads us into the third misconception.
The belief that shift handovers are merely for attendance checks and roster updates. We have to acknowledge the baseline reality of night shifts in food manufacturing.
They typically operate with thinner benches. Recoveries from mechanical disruptions are slower, and scrap rates are usually higher.
But treating it as a fixed, unavoidable constraint is a fundamental design failure. The assumption that the night shift will simply underperform is exactly where operational drift begins.
When leadership accepts that premise, they stop designing systems to support the night shift. To illustrate this continuity failure, consider the physical reality of a butter tempering process.
Imagine the handover overlap between the day supervisor and the incoming night leader. It is a critical 15-minute window.
Yet the entire time is consumed by discussing roster changes, covering two specific absences, and deciding where to place a new trainee.
What goes completely unmentioned is a critical active constraint. The butter for the next massive production run was pulled from cold storage late. It physically requires additional time to temper before it can be processed.
Because that constraint is not handed over, the night shift begins operating exactly on the schedule they were given by planning.
They start the heavy mixers on time. The inevitable result is a catastrophic texture failure. Multiple large batches are completely scrapped.
The operational fallout extends beyond the waste. The day shift immediately blames the night shift for poor execution.
The night shift begins hiding constraints because they expect blame. Trust across the boundary deteriorates completely.
In our consulting analysis, we frame two distinct strategic designs to correct this dynamic. The first is to design for risk control.
If your night shift genuinely lacks deep technical support and you cannot change that, you must schedule to the capability you actually have.
You place the high ambiguity work, the heavy changeovers, and the tight specifications on the day shift. You use the night shift strictly for stable, long runs.
The day shift's primary responsibility becomes removing all uncertainty before the handoff, locking the plan, and verifying absolute readiness.
The second strategy is to design for capacity.
If your commercial outcomes dictate that you require maximum output at night to meet demand, you must purposely lift the night shift's capability.
This involves moving some of your best, most experienced operators to the night rotation. It means granting them clear, unambiguous stop rights without needing to wake up a plant manager.
And providing dedicated remote engineering support. When we see clients implement this deliberate design, we observe that night output can shift from 50% of day shift output to 80 or even 90%.
It is a massive step change, driven entirely by intentional design, not luck.
Regardless of whether you design for risk control or design for capacity, the solution at the boundary is exactly the same. You must implement a brutally short, lightweight handover mechanism.
We advise capping it at roughly 5 items maximum. The focus must be exclusively on exceptions, active constraints, like the late butter and defer decisions.
If the list grows beyond 5 items, it turns into a mere narrative. It becomes storytelling, and the handover reverts to improvisation.
Let us turn to the cross-functional level, which brings us to our final focus area, misconception number 4, the belief that functional excellence naturally leads to business success.
We see organizations with brilliant quality leaders, excellent maintenance directors, and sharp production managers. Yet, we see these plants stall consistently at cross-functional intersections.
We call this intersection gridlock. It occurs when conditions are highly ambiguous and trade-offs must be made rapidly.
Functional specialization works perfectly in steady flow, but when objectives collide, the system paralyzes.
For example, deciding whether to spend the maintenance budget right now to prevent a catastrophic downtime event later in the quarter, or taking a planned schedule hit today to stabilize a drifting quality metric.
We identify this as the scoreboard problem. Functional key performance indicators begin to act like veto rights. Consider the dynamic carefully. The downside of a decision is often local and highly visible.
If the quality manager stops the line, they hit the production manager's volume budget.
However, the upside of that same decision, protecting the brand's enterprise value, is shared across the organization or delayed in time.
Because that local exposure is priced much higher by the individual manager who has to report it on Friday, ambiguity becomes incredibly dangerous.
When leaders operate in these silos, no data becomes a highly convenient shield to avoid making a personal bet.
The surface looks like bureaucratic delay. You see requests for more alignment meetings, demands for endless data analysis, but the underlying logic is simple risk management. They are protecting their specific scoreboard.
Our analysis emphasizes that strong functional departments are absolutely necessary,
Yeah.
but they are not sufficient on their own.
If executive leadership allows powerful functions to ignore the broader decision contract, the plant stays incredibly busy with alignment meetings, but the system stays painfully slow.
To resolve this, you have to make trade-offs decidable before the crisis hits. We advise our clients to pre-own these recurring collisions. You must establish what we call bounded decision rights.
This simply means defining in advance that Manager A has the authority to spend up to X amount or halt a line for up to Y hours to prevent downtime or protect quality without needing a committee consensus.
Exactly. It means defining who can decide under specific conditions, setting default actions when those conditions are not met, and creating a clear return path.
This ensures that the organization learns from the intersection, making the next collision cheaper and faster to resolve.
When you establish bounded decision rights, uncertainty triggers a controlled operational path rather than a political fight about who is allowed to act.
It eliminates the quiet stall of procedural delays and prevents local optimization from destroying enterprise value.
As we conclude our analysis of these 4 governance misconceptions, we want to leave you with a new paradigm to consider as you walk your plant floors tomorrow.
Instead of just asking if your meetings are efficient or if your operators are taking ownership, we want you to ponder a broader philosophical shift.
If your facility's daily meetings perfectly manage your recurring losses, but your governance system lacks the mechanisms to permanently close them, who is actually dictating your strategy?
Is it your executive leadership team, or are your operations secretly being run by your unresolved disruptions? Thank you for listening to Value Gene Insight Conversations. To deep dive, please see the show notes. For more on food industry topics, visit valuegeneconsulting.com or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If today's discussion resonated with you, please do not hesitate to reach out to us to continue this dialogue. Have a great day.